Are you involved in a business or thinking about starting one? Do you know there may be environmental impacts from business activities? According to the Environmental Protection Act of 1996, businesses such as gas stations, rice mills, large-scale agriculture and poultry farms, large-scale mining and forestry operations, hotels, and resorts must be authorized. Persons proposing any of these activities need to submit an application for environmental authorization to the EPA. Hello, and welcome to The Environment Matters, a monthly production of the Environmental Protection Agency in Guyana, where we explore the work of the EPA in fulfilling its mandate of environmental management and biodiversity conservation. I am your host, Aretha Ford. Now, I know if you're a regular viewer of our program, I should say, you're accustomed to seeing officers of the agency talk about various aspects of our work. But for this episode of The Environment Matters, I have with me two very special guests who will join me today in talking about wildlife protection and conservation in Guyana. Now, this is a first for The Environment Matters because we have a blended interview today. In studio with me is a face that is very, very familiar to many of you. You don't have to be in the environment sector to know this person. I have with me none other than Mrs. Annette Arjoon-Martins, and she is here in her capacity as the president of the Guyana Marine Conservation Society, because we know she wears many hats. Welcome, Annette.
Thank you, Aretha.
And online, we have Mr. Deuel Hughes. He is the communications officer at the Guyana Wildlife Conservation and Management Commission. That was a mouthful. Deuel, thank you for joining us online and welcome to the show.
Hey, Rita.
All right. So, as I said, we'll be discussing wildlife today, of course, as you would have heard, based on the guests that we have today. And I'd like to say in advance, Happy Wildlife Day. That's celebrated on March the 3rd. And so, of course, it was fitting for us to choose this particular topic for this episode. Now, I'll start with Deuel. And I'd like for you to kindly share with us, information about the Wildlife Commission, as it's one of the newer state entities that's on the block. And then, Annette, I'll give you a chance to tell us about the evolution of the GMCS. So, Deuel, over to you.
All right, thank you, Rita. As you did mention, the Guyana Wildlife Conservation and Management Commission is indeed one of the newest environment agencies in Guyana, because we have only been established since 2017. And this came about with the passage of the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act in that year. Right? And so that is what gave birth to the commission. Now, before the commission was implemented, there was actually the Wildlife Division. The Wildlife Division had responsibilities relating directly to the international trade of wildlife. And so when the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act was passed, the Wildlife Division transitioned to become the Guyana Wildlife Conservation and Management Commission. And by becoming a commission, the division took on added responsibilities. And so, in addition to managing the international trade of wildlife, the commission also has the responsibility of managing the local trade of wildlife, and the commission is also responsible for conducting research into wildlife. We are responsible for ensuring compliance with the wildlife regulations, and also responsible for raising awareness about wildlife and wildlife-related issues. Now, the Wildlife Commission, it is actually the we call ourselves, or we are known as the CITES Management Authority, And a little bit later in the program, we're going to get to understand a little bit of what CITES actually is, or what that means.
All right, so Annette, I'll invite you to tell us about the GMCS.
All right, so basically the Guyana Marine Conservation Society started out as the Guyana Marine Turtle Conservation Society, which was established in 2000. I'm very proud that it's the only national conservation organization in Guyana. And this year we are obviously celebrating our 21st anniversary.
Yes.
So thank you very much for the EPA having us here on this discussion, and especially to be here with Deuel as well from his agency. But I want to also take the opportunity to acknowledge the tremendous work of the late Dr. Peter Pritchard, who actually came to Guyana in the early 1960s, where he came to study the sea turtle populations of Guyana. And it was then when Peter went out to Shell Beach, we first documented that there were 4 out of the 7 species of sea turtles that nest in Shell Beach each year from March to August. And I say that in the context that that in itself is a very valuable thing, in that we have over half a century of data on the sea turtle populations of Guyana. So I really want to acknowledge Dr. Pritchard's early efforts, also that of Audley James, who was then a turtle hunter that Peter befriended, and he became a turtle protector. And I just happened to, by chance, be flying Peter out to Mabruma every year. And I'm wondering, what is this guy doing coming to Guyana and going out to Shell Beach every year? And I asked him to go out with him one year. That was 1989. And I saw my first, sea turtle and fell in love. So in 2000, a group of us basically came together, and the Guyana Marine Turtle Conservation Society was formed with the explicit mandate of sea turtle conservation. But in 2003, the Environmental Protection Agency, in recognition of our work, mandated us to be the lead agency to take Shell Beach into protected area. And that, of course, expanded the mandate of our work tremendously. We were very proud that the Shell Beach was declared as a protected area. And then in 2014, we had the beginning of an inexplicable stranding of sperm whales washing up all over Guyana.
Yes, I remember that.
We still don't have a lot of capacity to determine exactly what was causing that, but it went on from 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017. And then we decided to, change our name to the Guyana Marine Conservation Society. Right. So we take on a very broad mandate now to do marine conservation along all the 6 coastal regions, as well as into our marine space. So sitting here today, being 21 years old, I'm very happy that we're here to share with your audience some of the things that we have achieved over the year. Thank you very much.
All right, so I must say on behalf of the EPA, a very happy anniversary to the GMCS, and to thank you for all the work that has been done over the years, for your dedication to environmental protection. And, I'm glad that you gave that explanation, how you came to become interested in sea turtle conservation, and how you move from, just monitoring sea turtles to the wider marine space. Because when I saw the name change, I'm sure many others like me would be like, how did this happen? So thank you for sharing that with us. And, it just hits home for those of us who sit and think, all right, well, the environment is so big and the problems are so gigantic. I'm only one person. What can I do? And we always like to say that the environment is everybody's business. That's the first thing. And it takes just one person to make a difference. One man can make a difference, or in this case, one woman, right? So it's never too late to start to take action on the environment. Now, Deuel, I switch over back to you, and I'd like for you to tell us what exactly is wildlife? Because, like the environment, the definition of wildlife, I guess, is very broad. And tell us a bit about wildlife in Guyana, some statistics, what types of wildlife do we have? And you did mention CITES, so I know you'll tell us, and, those at home, what CITES is.
All right, so our act defines wildlife as any non-cultivated or non-domestic organism in the kingdom of animals, plants, and also um, there are some microorganisms that make up wildlife. So, for example, fungi, prokaryota, protista, and so on, right? And not only the animals or the plants alone, but also any of their part or derivative. All right. So that is the definition for wildlife from our act. And so it can be an animal, it can be a plant that is not domesticated, or even a part of that animal or plant, right? And even as it goes on to mention, microscopic organisms that we cannot even see with our naked eyes. And so in Guyana, here we are blessed with numerous species of wildlife, um, and these are actually categorized differently, right? Now, as you mentioned, CITES, as I stated before, one of the roles of the commission is to manage and monitor the trade of wildlife, and especially the international trade of wildlife. And CITES, which is spelled, or well, it's actually an acronym, CITES. It means Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. All right, and so CITES is really an international document that various countries around the world would have signed on to be able to better manage the trade of wildlife. And under CITES, there are three appendices. So there's Appendix 1, Appendix 2, and Appendix 3. And this separates animals based on their conservation status, right? And it gives varying levels of protection to different animals and even plants as well. And so any species that is listed in Appendix 1, those are the most endangered among animals and plants. And they are those in Appendix 1, they are threatened with extinction, and international trade in them, commercial international trade, is prohibited. So persons cannot trade, these cannot be exported or imported for a commercial purpose. However, they are allowed to be traded for special reasons, which include scientific research. Uh, those in Appendix 2 are those that are not necessarily threatened with extinction now, but if the trade is not monitored for some of these species and it's closely controlled, then they as well could become extinct. And those in Appendix 3 um, are those for which the species, or which the trade, sorry, is regulated, right? And it needs the cooperation of countries to prevent unsustainable or illegal exploitation. And so CITES is really the international community's way of managing the the trade of wildlife to ensure the conservation of wildlife. Here in Guyana, um, well, there's also another way in which species can be classified, right? And that is according to the IUCN Red List, which has 7 classifications. But I'll only dwell on a couple of these because they are relevant to our discussion. And so some of these, according to the IUCN Red List, some of these classifications would be least concern, near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, and extinct in the wild. And so based on these classifications, in Guyana, we have protected species. And species in Guyana are those that are classified as vulnerable, those that are classified as endangered or critically endangered. All right, and so we some of these that are protected would be our wildcats. For example, we have the jaguar, the puma, the ocelot, the jaguarundi, and the margay. Those are our 6 wildcats that are protected. Also, the giant anteater is another protected animal, and also the giant river otter. So those are just a few examples of some animals that are protected.
All right. So for the purpose of Annette and her organization, how do we stand with marine species and their classification and their status in Guyana?
Marine
Marine
species
species.
also fall under this classification. So, for example, we know of the leatherback turtle, right? We know of the green turtle. Those are also protected species, and by protected, it means that they we're not allowed to trouble them, or you're not allowed to harvest them, to kill them, to even interfere with them, right? You're not supposed to do them anything. They're just supposed to be left alone.
So, is there any more you can tell us about wildlife in Ghana in terms of numbers? And I'd like for you to share with our audience, like we know about open season and closed season, and to share with us what these things mean.
Okay, so well, open season, well, the closed season is the period of the year that particular species of wildlife cannot be hunted, or they cannot be traded or trapped. And so that's basically what the closed season is. And closed seasons don't apply to every species of wildlife that we have here. There are some that are, you could say that the season for them is open throughout the year, right? But there are some that are that we need that need a certain level of protection. The closed season is there to ensure that they reproduce, so that they continue to multiply, right? Because if we don't give them that level of protection, then it is possible that they could become extinct. Um, in terms of numbers, um, they, we actually have over 8,000 species, or well, it's approximate, based on studies that would have been done, that we have approximately over 8,000 species of wildlife here in Guyana.
What are some of the species that you said not every single wildlife is, the closed season does not apply to them. So, what are some of the species that, have an open season and a closed season? And just before we go over to Annette, I'd like for you to tell us, like, what's the most traded species that you know the Wildlife Commission has noted, and some little stats like that.
Okay,
Okay.
so our the species that are most traded would be what we refer to as citizens, and these are our parrots and macaws, right? And so that is the species that would be, or those are the species that are most traded, right? Some other species that are traded would include the Kinkajou, um, and also monkeys are a fairly popular species, as well as certain species of snakes. Right? In terms of some species that have closed season, um, and again, it's very similar because um, these are species that are more popularly traded, right? And so because of they are more popularly traded, right? That's especially a reason why they need a closed season, right? And so these include the kinkajou, they include the squirrel monkey, the tapir, um, citizens, which I mentioned are parrots and macaws, um, some wild ducks as well are on the close season list. We have the iguana, which the correct name is the green iguana, and also the red-footed tortoise, as well as the powis, and even two species of deer, which are the red-brocked deer and the white-tailed deer. Some species that would not are not on the close season list would be like the laba is one of them, and also peccary. Another one that let me see another popular one that persons might know. Also, well, the giant anteater, right? But the giant anteater is a protected species, right? And so that, well, you're not supposed to harvest it at all.
All right. So I just have one other question. What kind of animal is a kinkajou? That's the very first time I've ever heard of that name being mentioned. So I'm very curious.
All right. So, well, it's a mammal first of all, and it's actually related to the raccoon, right? And so many times persons actually, well, especially overseas, actually look to have these as pets, right? So it actually looks very similar to a raccoon, but it's more brown. It has more brown fur.
All right, thank you for that. And you did mention that persons like to collect these animals to keep as pets. And so my mind wandered to, maybe in another couple of decades, the definition of wildlife might change as more persons seek to bring like what we term more exotic animals into their homes to keep as pets. If you're on the internet and you see a lot of persons bringing small cats, not the domesticated ones, but the smaller of the big cats that they would keep as pets. Persons would bring, like alligators and other animals that we wouldn't normally, keep as pets. So maybe that's something we want to keep in mind. Not that it necessarily happens here in Guyana, but, it's something that we should keep our eye on the international stage. All right, so Annette, you've been working with wildlife in Guyana for more than a decade, and I know because of your other your profession, you've had some very interesting experiences. One of which you shared with us that led to the formation of the GMCS. Can you share with our audience, some of those interesting encounters or experiences that you've had with wildlife?
Sure, but before I do that, I would like to pick
Yes.
up on a couple of things that Deuel said. And thank you for asking about the threatened species in our marine environment. And he, he did mention the sea turtles, but for example, only recently the leatherback sea turtle was moved from the status of least concerned to endangered. And globally, the leatherback populations are quite threatened. And in the past, when we were doing the conservation program from, say, 1989 to until 2011, when the Protected Areas Commission took it over, one of our biggest success stories was that we had managed to have the leatherback population, which at the time was pretty low as well, recover over the years through a series of mechanisms. And one of those mechanisms actually was that we were able to go to Minister Satchsaw at the time, who was the focal minister at the Ministry of Agriculture, under which fisheries fell. And I remember Romeo de Freitas and myself having a big map that we drew by hand.
Wow.
And we put in red dots every single area where leatherback sea turtles had washed up dead. Because remember, sea turtles, like us, breathe air. So when they come up and then they get caught in a net, for example, they will drown. So we took this map with about 94 dead sea turtle mortalities located in the map of Region 1. And we asked Minister Saw to please consider having us be able to have a no netting zone where, for example, at the beginning of the sea turtle season in March, we would do an aerial flyover, literally fly over the entire Shell Beach from between the Pomeroon mouth to the Wainie River mouth, and we would count and see where the most turtle tracks were. So that will indicate where the most turtles would actually come to nest, and that's where we'd have our conservation camps. So for example, when we had Tiger Beach identified as one of the most prolific nesting beaches, Minister Saw allowed us to have 5 kilometers of the Tiger Beach declared as a no netting zone. So fishermen weren't allowed to go and fish there and put their nets there. And over the years, we actually saw that result in a dramatic increase in the populations. So that's one of the most exciting things that we did very early. And again, coming back to the integral collaboration with our focal ministries and agencies. And I wish also to tell you, maybe you didn't know, that the EPA was on our board during the earliest years of our formation. And at the time, Mr. Bertelsen himself, Per Bertelsen, and then later Dr. David Singh were the EPA representatives. So you guys go back to us since our embryonic years as well. Also touching on what Deuel mentioned too, and also I would wish to elaborate, is that while we know about the sea turtles because they've been studied exhaustively over the past 50 years, our harsh reality remains that there has been little or no studies on the other marine life forms. So in Guyana, other than the bangameri that we eat or the gilbaka that we might be able to afford, we really don't know much about the other marine life in our marine space. And this needs to be corrected sooner than later. Because, for example, our colleagues in Suriname, whose research is much more robust, have done studies to show that we have sperm whales passing through the migratory corridor during the months of April and May. Why is that important? We have a shared migratory corridor, and of course now with the increased vessel traffic from the Demerara Harbor to Exxon's FPSO, clearly that increased traffic would now significantly impact the marine life that's passing through those corridors. So I'm hoping that, you know, we could really go about getting some marine studies done so we could have these baselines, because unless we have the baselines, we can't manage, we can't monitor.
Right.
So to come back as well to your specific question, what are some of the most memorable things in my several decades of work? Certainly the formation of the Guyana Marine Turtle Conservation Society would be the big one, because it's the first national conservation organization. And the fact that we have, through the 21 years, achieved so much is a beautiful thing. Secondly, the pivotal role that we played to enable Shell Beach to become in Guyana's only coastal protected area is right up there as well. And again, in a time of oil and gas, this is crucial because Exxon's own oil spill modeling has shown that if there's an unmitigated oil spill, the currents will take it smack bang into the northwestern part of Shell Beach protected area. And the impacts on the biodiversity there obviously are going to be obvious. Don't forget, apart from the nesting beaches with the 4 species of sea turtles that nest there, you have the wetlands at the back, and it's a haven for migratory species. So I don't know if you saw Mike Charles' documentary he launched last month.
Not quite yet, I'm getting around.
But on the open end, you will see thousands of flamingos, thousands of roseate spoonbills, several thousands of brilliant scarlet ibises. So I think that in itself will show you the rich abundance of biodiversity found at the back of those wetlands. And then, of course, you have in Region 1, the most intact mangrove ecosystem in the Bremer-Mora Passage.
Yes.
And even if you go into that small Bremer-Mora Passage mangrove forested area, we actually have 4 of the IUCN red listed species there. So, I mean, that in itself is a remarkable thing, you know, the jaguar, the puma, the river otters, And right now we are doing a lot of camera trapping as well. I'm sure we're going to probably find others.
Yes.
So just to pick off those three things in terms of our most, interesting sort of experiences and big accomplishments. I could go on until 2021, but I'm sure we don't have enough. I'm sure we don't have enough time.
As I was saying, there's not enough time.
Yeah.
For you to really share with us the wealth of your knowledge and the experience that you've garnered over the years with regards to conserving Guyana's species.
But Arita, why we focus on wildlife? Because today's topic is about wildlife. I also want to say that the majority of macaws and parrots that are being traded come from Region 1. And it's really important that the Guyana Wildlife Commission has a very robust program there, because we're going to expand the low carbon development strategy to now include biodiversity, watersheds, and the blue economy.
Yes, I saw
And when
that
you look
in
at
the
the expansion into biodiversity, we will have to be making some very important decisions. How much wildlife trade is actually compatible with this ecotourism product that we want to grow? When visitors come to Guyana, our wildlife is a big part of that experience. 1 in 3 visitors going to Abercrombie would see a jaguar. What a beautiful thing that is. We have jaguars in Shell Beach as well that sometimes attack the turtles when the savannas are on fire and their prey is scarce. So I think going forward, we need to really have some very deep and serious conversations about, how do we find a balance with the wildlife trade and our fledgling tourism industry, because that is a very, very important part of our product. So I will ask that, we start thinking about that. But also just to end on saying that, while I'm very happy to be here, one of my proudest moments is that today we actually have 4 brilliant young marine biologists and marine scientists on our board. And I very much like for those young professionals to be included in your conversations going forward, because they have their own amazing stories to tell as well. So right now our board is beautifully balanced by elders like myself and Raquel Thomas and John Flores and Michael Amsterdam. But also we have half of the board as well.
Of youth and experience.
And also for the first time, these marine scientists and marine biologists, which there's a very scarce amount of them available. So in closing, I would say that is also like one of my happiest moments, that we have these amazing, and they're all young women as well. Not that I have a gender bias, but these are all brilliant young women with their masters in marine science and their degrees in marine biology. So it's a beautiful thing.
Yes, and I'm glad that you mentioned that they're all young women. So, I really would like for us to expand our conversation into, like solely the work of the GMCS, because it seems that we're missing out on a lot if, we're not connected via social media to see what the GMCS is up to. And there's so many things that I want to pick up on that you would have mentioned, but I just want to share with our audience that Annette is on the National Oil Spill Response Committee, right?
Right.
Is that the correct name?
I am, and
yes.
And so is Felicia Collins, the young marine biologist I referenced. And Felicia is actually from Port Kaituma. She's from Region 1. She studied marine biology in UE, Trinidad, came back and immediately got on board with us and is out in Region 1 actually carrying out the camera trapping research with Matt Hallett from University of Florida, and just doing amazing stuff, So in a way, the next generation are really, really very proactively involved in our conservation efforts. And for me, that's the exit strategy, because, if you have another generation now coming to take the baton, I mean, how incredible is that? So
your organization is a good example of succession planning, because of course we must look at how do we evolve, and how do we continue the work that we would have laid the foundation for
Absolutely, and
right?
I think anybody who is in the NGO sort of field, and you look at okay, you know what the role that you've played. Well, and the reality is also you have to have that succession planning early as well. So I see myself more and more pulling back and serving as an advisory
Advisor.
elder,
Yes.
and then these young, you know, female leaders to basically, and you know, this timing of this show while we're doing this in time for celebration of World Wildlife Day on the 3rd of March.
Yes.
On the 8th of March, it's International Women's
Women's
Day.
Day, yes.
So, I mean, it couldn't be just at the most beautiful and perfect time. And so,
Yes, indeed it is. And I'm glad that your organization, you know, is practicing that talk of, you know, youth are the future. So thank you very much for, you know, really stepping back and allowing the young persons to sort of take the lead when it comes to the activities of the organization. And so, of course, we look forward to the results of the research that's being conducted in the Berrima Mora Passage, because we did see a press release on that study that's being undertaken. Now, with that, we will take our first ad break and we'll see you on the other half of the show.
At the Environmental Protection Agency, we believe that the environment is everybody's business. We can start caring for our planet by becoming more environmentally friendly in our everyday actions. Here's what you can do: dispose of waste in a garbage bin, clean our drains, yards, and carpets regularly, take a reusable shopping bag to the market, support local butchers and farmers to reduce packaged waste, plant a kitchen garden, trees and flowers, compost your organic waste, conserve water and electricity, carry a reusable water bottle. These little acts are good for your health and that of the environment. Remember, healthy people work better and achieve more, and together, small actions make a big difference. For further information on how you can help, please contact the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, Ganges Street, Sophia, or telephone us at 225-5467. You can also visit our website, epagana.org, or our Facebook and Instagram pages.
Welcome back to the Environment Matters. If you're now joining us, Mr. Deuel Hughes of the Guyana Wildlife Conservation and Management Commission and Mrs. Annette Arjoon-Martins of the Guyana Marine Conservation Society are joining me to talk about wildlife in Guyana. Now, during the first half of the show, Deuel and Annette were sharing, you know, bits about their respective organizations and sharing experiences of working in the sector. Now, in this half of the show, we'd like to talk about some of the work that they were doing, and Annette was just mentioning that. But I'll give Deuel a chance to, you know, share some of the current work that the commission is undertaking and what do they have planned for the future. So, Deuel?
All right, thank you once again. One of the major things that we are looking to implement, especially in this year, is the full rollout of our domestic licensing system. And so currently, when it comes to international trade and persons who want to export or import wildlife, it is required by law that they have license. They need to have a commercial exportation license before they are involved in that, and then they need permits every time they are going to trade an animal, to export an animal. So previously, or even when the commission was first implemented, it didn't cater to the domestic trade, the licensing of persons in the domestic trade. And so in 2019, if I'm remembering the year correctly, the Wildlife Conservation Management and Sustainable Use Regulations was passed, which mandated for persons to be licensed in the domestic trade. So basically, persons who buy and sell wildlife here in Guyana would need a license. And there are 6 categories of licenses. Right? There's the trapping license, which basically applies to persons who do the trapping of wildlife, and it even applies to persons who harvest wildlife for subsistence or for their sustenance. Right? Um, Also, there is the wildlife collecting license. In the wildlife trade, there is what we call middlemen, those persons who would buy wildlife from the trappers and then sell it to those who export. And so the collecting license refers to those, and it also applies to pet shops and collectors of wild plants. Then there's the commercial license, which is for um, vendors of wildlife, whether that be live animals or wild meat. And so those persons need a commercial license. The other type of license is the recreational license, which is for persons who hunt wildlife for pleasure. And then there's the wildlife captive license, which applies to persons hold um, who have more than a total of 8 species of wildlife. And then there's a special wildlife license, which applies to persons and institutions who who hold wildlife for scientific purposes, right? And so come later in the year, we will have the full rollout of this system, where anyone who is involved in the trade of wildlife, whether locally or internationally, they need to have this license. Whichever category of license applies to them, they need that license. Um, in addition to that, we are also, I mentioned one of the roles of the commission is to actually conduct research into wildlife. All right. Presently, we're actually doing uh, uh, a citizen management. We're implementing a citizen management project, which is geared at studying and putting a management system in place for parrots and macaws. All right. As Annette would have mentioned before the break, these are popularly traded species, and so because in Guyana, we are looking at sustainable development and seeking to ensure the the preservation of our species, right? We need to have proper systems in place. And so we're looking to implement that citizen management system to ensure that the trading and well, exploitation, for lack of a better word, of these species is of such that they are sustained and they're not um, exploited unsustainably, so to the point that they become extinct or endangered. Right. In addition to that, we're also looking to implement this year transportation regulations for wildlife. And so those regulations would capture how wildlife can be transported to the various, it would legally ratify these measures in which how persons can transport wildlife, the types of cages, dimensions, and this kind of thing. Right? All of this is what will be implemented. And also, we're looking to do population assessments for caimans, tapir, and the red and yellow-footed tortoise. And these projects, they're actually funded by ACTO, which is the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, which is a South American-based conservation organization. And so, as it relates to the work of the commission, those are our immediate projects that we're focusing on at this moment.
All right, Deuel, thanks for sharing. And I'm glad that you mentioned Octo funding because we need money to do research. Research is very expensive. Research is important. And, an old lecturer of mine and yours, I'm not going to call names, she used to say that conservation without money is conversation. And of course, we don't want to just talk, talk, talk. We need to know what is out there in order to know, what to protect, what level of protection is needed. And, I can go on and on. All right. So, Deuel, before you leave, are there any words of encouragement, advice that you'd like to share with our audience as it relates to wildlife?
Yes, definitely. Just to remind persons that of the wildlife regulations that are in place and the need to abide by them. Sometimes we see some, and we receive some reports of persons just going and hunting as they wish, um, any type of species, whether it be young or older or whatever the case might be. And so we just want persons to know, well, some persons might not know, and so we want them to know that wildlife regulations are in place. These regulations can be found on our website, wildlife.gov.gy. So persons can go on there to get more information to ensure that whatever they practice, it's in tune with the regulations and which are meant to protect our wildlife. In addition to that, as you did mention, World Wildlife Day is coming up, or it's celebrated on the 3rd of March every year. And the theme for this year is Forests and Livelihoods, Sustaining People and Planet. And the reason for that theme is for us to understand the importance of our forest resources. And we know that our wildlife, or most wildlife species, inhabit our forested areas. And so we need to our actions need to be geared towards the preservation and protection of our wildlife so that we can continue to benefit from 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 the wildlife. All right. And of course, I just want to tell persons that they can also find us on Facebook at Guyana Wildlife Conservation and Management Commission. So they can go there. They can call us on 2230939 or 2230940 to report cases of wildlife conflict or any incidents relating to wildlife.
Yes, thank you very much, Deuel, for sharing with us. You've heard there the contact for the GWCMC. So if you want to get involved in the wildlife trade, or if you just want to learn about wildlife, make contact with that organization for information that you can trust. All right, so Annette, I know you shared, quite a bit about what the GMCS would have done in the past. And of course, we commend you on all that the organization has achieved. And so we'll give you the chance as well to share with us, what is currently being done. We spoke about the studies in the Barima Mora Passage and, tell us what is in the pipelines for GMCS.
Great. So one of the most exciting developments in the pipeline actually commenced on Valentine's Day last year. So on the 14th of February 2020, the Guyana Marine Conservation Society hosted a team from Dalhousie University, which has a very strong ocean governance program, as well as Global Fish and Watch, which is an organization that does a lot of work in the fisheries, conservation of the fisheries sector. And we signed an MOU basically to collaborate on ocean governance, marine spatial planning, research as well. So coming out of that collaboration, we actually started working with an organization called Sky Truth. And basically Sky Truth is funded by Google Earth. Okay. And they have been able to provide to us in real time satellite imagery of the marine space that we are keeping an eye on. And that is tremendous because in the past, if you had to go and investigate something, you had to look at either getting the Coast Guard vessel, because the Coast Guard are on our board, or finding the trawler of a fisherman and going out to actually investigate whatever was reported. Having access to Sky Truth and their technology, their superb technology, we're able to say, well, look, okay, we have a report in X, Y, or Z space, and could we get an update on what's happening? And that has been transformative. And SkyTruth does all of this with us for free. So that's like one of our biggest accomplishment. Also, like for example as well too, SkyTruth has a very robust global monitoring program on flaring. I think it's about 11 years old now. They've been 11 years now they've been doing that. So again, if you want to sort of get information on flaring in Guyana, that is a tremendous resource. So that has been huge for us. Secondly, with the Global Fishing Watch and Dalhousie University, we're working on with them on a marine tool that they're developing, which basically again allows Guyana to log in, and you can go in your marine space and get information on any type of fishing, artisanal fishing, seabob fishing, deep water fishing. And I actually was privileged to have engaged with Minister Todd 2 weeks ago in my capacity as the chair of the environmental subcommittee of the Private Sector Commission. Okay. And when I mentioned to him this collaboration we're doing with the Global Fishing Watch and what it's actually resulting in, he actually very efficiently followed up a week later with his staff, Miss Donette Street, who is one of the staff in the Frontiers Department that has the responsibility for the marine environment. And we had only on Thursday a very productive conversation where Global Fishing Watch demonstrated this tool as well that I think blew them out of the water. They were so amazed at what it could be doing. So that is now going to be explored further to also have some synergies with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who I understand as well are working on they have a concept note on ocean policy, which is huge because Guyana needs an ocean policy so desperately. So that is like one of the most exciting development ever. And then finally, last but not least, we have this brilliant young marine biologist from Region 1, Felicia Collins, who is working on a camera trapping project to try and see what sort of large mammals are in the Berrima-Mora Passage mangrove ecosystem. And Deuel mentioned that this year's wildlife theme is forest and livelihoods. And what is really important to know and important to try and address is that because of the mass migration from Venezuela, a lot of Venezuelans are pouring into Region 1 and putting not only our social services, but also our natural environment under tremendous stress.
Okay.
So one of the species that he said that they're doing a national inventory on, two actually, the red and yellowfoot tortoises. For example, when these Venezuelans are coming into the Northwest and they go through the forest, they're capturing anything they can sell, and what they don't sell, they eat. So that in itself is putting a tremendous pressure on the tortoise population that are normally consumed, as well as the trapping as well too, for the trade. I think that we need to really focus on that as well. So Felicia went out in the Berrima-Mora Passage to do her research, but more importantly, she ensured that she identified 4 youngsters from Mabruma and the communities around Mabruma to go with her. So there's a very important element of capacity building. So she had 2 teachers and 2 other youngsters from the Mabruma area that went out with her in the community, and she also worked with a local hunter from the Aruco area, who she said without his knowledge of the forests and the creeks that they had to go and set the traps, it would have taken them twice as long to do what they did. So they actually just completed setting 30 camera traps, which they will go and retrieve the cameras in May to sort of see what sort of wildlife is in that area. So that is the present ongoing project, and that project, the resources are only going to take us up to August. We would like to continue longer to retrieve and set and retrieve the cameras another time, but we don't have the finances to do that. And coming back to what I imagine Dr. Bino told you guys. Indeed, you know,
Yes, she was correct.
a lot of talk about
It's correct.
conservation without the money to enable it remains stuck. And this has been one of our reality checks. So I'm also hopeful because about 2 weeks ago, we spoke to the Exxon actually had a stakeholder consultation with about 100 stakeholders. And one of the things that they mentioned that they're working on is a lot of additional surveys. So I asked them if there is any opportunity for these young marine scientists and marine biologists to work with their international experts when they come in to do the research. Because what has happened since oil was discovered in 2015 is there's been absolutely zero local counterpart in terms of our young rangers or scientists going out to the teams to learn what's in our marine space, even when they were doing it in just very opportunistic periods of a couple of months at a time, which was like to do the protected species observer whenever a vessel was doing seismic surveys, for example. That is not marine research, because marine research should be done throughout the year, throughout different seasons.
And of course, it takes much longer than a few months.
Totally. So, so I made a very strong representation that going forward, any environmental impact assessments, any biodiversity surveys that are necessary, we would like to ensure that the local counterpart and local content is really abided by, that our young qualified marine biologists and marine scientists could be part of that effort. So once that happens, and once the companies are sincere about having local content, I think that will also give us the opportunity to really get those baselines that we Guyanese need to be getting for ourselves, and without which we can't manage nor monitor our marine space.
Yes.
So those are like the three ongoing initiatives at the moment.
All right. So indeed, you did capture two things that are very important for biodiversity conservation and protection, and that is funding and the need for partnerships that came out in the latter half of our discussion. We definitely need to partner with both state and non-state actors to get action. All right, that is quite a lot to soak in, and of course we urge persons to support not only the GMCS but other NGOs that are working in the environment. And with this, I bring this episode of the Environment Matters to a close. But before we do, remember to keep updated with the work of the agency by following us on social media. You can find us on Facebook. We're on Instagram. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, don't forget to pick up a copy of the Sunday Chronicle and the Guyana Times to read our weekly column, where you can get much more information on the work that we do and the work of our partners. Tune into our bi-weekly radio and television interviews, of course, for information. And don't forget, respect each other, respect the environment, stay safe, remember to wear your mask and sanitize. And until then, remember, the environment is everybody's business. Thank you for watching.
Beautiful.